This morning I visited the Governor-General and Her Excellency has accepted my advice that an election be held on Saturday, 3rd of May 2025.
When Australians have heard me say that I want to be the Prime Minister for home ownership, I mean it.
I mean, we're sounding like mad, but it doesn't look like we'll get there in the near future.
No competition from property investors, just a fair crack.
The free TAFE policy is just not working.
We can make Australia great again.
Is that an ode to Donald Trump?
No, if I said that, I don't even realise I said that, but no.
Election Countdown 2025.
For this campaign, we are doing a joint online phone bank with Victorian Labor and their Community Action Network in the second last week of the campaign on Wednesday, the 23rd of April at 6 p.m. It's just a great way for all of the great listeners of Socially Democratic to come together and actually see each other. And we'll do a bit of a check-in and maybe have a couple of drinks and some beers online afterwards at the end of the phone bank as well. Sign up today. The links to register for the phone bank are in the show notes, and we'll obviously be punching it out through social media as well. Tell your friends, bring people along. It should be a fun night. The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in 2025, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members as well. And you can join our community for free or for as little as $1.50 a month. And you too can help support this podcast. All paid members receive a welcome gift. So if you have recently signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking for your shipping address, because without that, then we can't send you your merch. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn has been fighting for workers' rights in Australia for more than 100 years. They believe the law should serve everyone and not just those that can afford it. So for empathetic and expert legal support, call Maurice Blackburn Lawyers today. All right, let's get on with today's episode. Okay, we are taping this one on a Wednesday morning on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And welcome to our third episode of our weekly election countdown series. It is week 3 of the campaign. Early voting starts next Tuesday. So basically the election starts next Tuesday. And election day itself is a mere 17 days away. And since we last recorded, we've now had both leaders formally launch their campaign, which happened simultaneously on Sunday. Well, actually, I think Labor stood up just after the Tories finished theirs. We had a coalition senator clearly missed the "We aren't talking like Trump" memo as she vowed to make Australia great again. And both campaigns made a pitch to first home buyers. And so lots to talk about this week. And to help me unpack the week that was from the campaign trail, I'm joined by two Labor campaign experts who subscribe to the demographics is not destiny theory of campaigning. So have plenty to share when it comes to winning a goddamn election. She's a former Deputy Chief of Staff to 3-time winning Premier Daniel Andrews, now the managing partner at Crane, Poole and Schmidt. Jessie, I'm Jessie McCrone. Welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
And he's a former Victorian campaign director, former National Assistant Secretary, former Senator and member for Batman, now a Doctor of Philosophy. Dr. David, let me make my own cup of tea, thanks. Feeney, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
A pleasure to be with you.
Do you know that, David? Someone who worked in an EO many, many, many years ago when you were the National Assistant Secretary and you travelled around the country, obviously had meeting with candidates and MPs. Someone said, you know what I like about David Feeney? Well, every time he comes to our office, I always offer him a cup of tea. And he says, no, thanks, I can make it myself. My hands aren't painted on. And I just think that the humility of the man that he would do that. He's such a down-to-earth bloke. And I just thought, that's very shrewd of David. And so I started doing that as well when I became a party official as well.
That's very shrewd of David. You, like, is everything a artifice with you, you cynical creature?
He's probably spent enough time with you, David, to know that that isn't necessarily a humble nature you have.
I am obviously very humble. I may have also been anxious that the coffee wasn't going to be made right. I'm very particular. No, that's a lovely story.
It is. And we'll be joined by the politics report for The Guardian, Benita Kolovos, later in the show to discuss the media in this federal campaign. So we're looking forward to hearing Benita's reflections as well. So the state of play for this election, 150 seats in the House of Representatives, 76 needed to win, 77 held by Labor. The Tories have got 53. They need 23 to get over the line. We're at the halfway mark of the campaign. Newspoll have released their latest survey, which was conducted over April 7 to 10. This timeframe included the leaders' debate. Top line numbers, it's still 52-48 to Labor on a two-party preferred. The LNP's primary dropped a point. Labor's, so they're now down to 35. Labor's primary held steady at 33. Not much change really elsewhere. I think in the crosstabs there were a little bit of movement across the state level polls. But broadly speaking, I guess we're not seeing too much change. There's just a suggestion really that Labor's numbers are holding up. And the betting odds reflect that. Labor's now $1.60, the coalition of $4.60. We're at the halfway mark. David, to you first of all, just get a bit of a vibe check on how you're feeling with halfway through this campaign.
Well, as we discussed in the last episode, I feel like the coalition got off to a dreadful start. And after stumbling from error to error in week one, I feel like they started to stabilise their position. In the aftermath of the People's Debate, there was a debate between the Treasurers and a debate between the Energy Ministers. And I feel like they kind of, as I say, stabilised their position. But their new stabilised position still had some fundamental problems with it. It was still a low-energy campaign. They still weren't mixing up or changing up the national conversation. And they weren't putting Labor under pressure on the policy front either. So that while they stabilised their position, they seem to have stabilised it in such a way as that they were in the same rut now that they were in at the last election, which is facing a diabolical two-front war between Labor on the one hand and the Teals on the other, and not having gained mastery over either. And there is a sense, I think, you'll remember, Stephen, I've talked about how I wondered if this election might see the end of the Teals because the factors that elected them were gone. Morrison, the acute sense that women were being treated badly, most particularly in the parliament, climate change. In the absence of those things, how were the Teals going to perform? And I'm now starting to wonder whether, in fact, the Teals might do quite well, and they've opened up new fronts to punish the Liberal Party in new places. And I don't get a sense that they're being routed in sort of the Kooyongs of this world. So I guess the vibe shift is it's turned more into an orthodox contest, and an orthodox contest along last election's lines is a bad contest for Dutton.
That's interesting. Jessie, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling that the vibe is good. I think certainly we've spoken the last couple of weeks about how Labor have held their own, and the Liberals, for all the reasons David just outlined, haven't had a great start to the campaign. I am nervous, though, having spent last night going back through the list of seats again. I am nervous about the actual path to victory to majority government, because I will say people are talking again about majority government from a Labor perspective. The polling suggests that it's within reach, and it's a question of which seats. So I am feeling better. I am worried about specific seats and how they will go, and I know that you'll have a particular podcast on that, Stephen. Just to touch on the Teals, it's interesting. I think there have been a couple of stumbles from the Liberal Party, Kooyong in particular. I think less the problem is that Amelia Hamer has her own two houses, isn't actually a renter. It's more reinforcing the Liberals are. Well, it's more reinforcing that Liberals are inauthentic. And she has just reinforced the electorate all of the reasons why you might not want to go with them again. I found the Teals' lack of jumping on work from home very interesting. It felt like that was a space for them to really punish the Liberal Party with those women voters that they've been so successful at messaging too that we're your representatives. I thought their absence from that debate very interesting, and possibly because they're weighing up the sort of conservative vote in their electorate and those sort of small business owners that may want people back in at work. I thought their absence of that debate was interesting. I don't know that they've necessarily landed many blows on the Liberal Party, but the more Dutton acts like Trump or has Trump as part of the debate, I think the better the Teals will do. I think that we are about to reach a very critical part of the campaign, which will seem very weird to people that are close campaign watchers, that the Easter period, everything will feel like it goes a bit quiet. And both campaigns are very anxious about the fact that we have this 10-day block where no one really knows whether people are going to be paying attention. Are they going to be watching the nightly news? Are we just going to be screaming into a vacuum? Is there space for there to be a campaign changer in the next 10 days? I would say the biggest key here is going to be a battle of the digital campaigns. People are not necessarily going to be logged on to watching the news or reading the newspapers over this period, but everyone is going to be avoiding their family on the phone. And if you are pumping up more content than the other guy, I think you're in a much better position. So I think that is going to be the under the radar campaign. It's going to be hard for people like us to assess because we are not the people that they should be advertising to. So I sort of add that as a bit of a vibe check in the middle. Both campaigns are anxious about the next 10 days, and they're right to be, because we kind of haven't, David, feel free to correct me here, we kind of haven't had this kind of holiday campaign lull period for a while in a national campaign, and everyone's a bit nervous about how it's going to impact us going forward.
No, I can't think of another example. I'm thinking 2016 was the long, interminable winter campaign of Malcolm Turnbull, where instead of going for the usual 33 days, he went for 604 days, or at least that's how it felt. But that's a different kind of problem.
Yeah.
There's lots to unpack in that, and I don't know whether I want to dive into that, but maybe we'll do that later. I mean, we have avoided talking about the Teals so far. They're not the main game in town, but yeah, you're both. I mean, they are.
Well, if you're sitting in Peter Dutton's
they
position,
are part of this story, aren't they? They're a part of this story. You know,
they are.
The obsession by certain journalists about the Teals just drives me insane, and I'm just like, there's plenty of other things going on in this campaign than what's happening on the on the bench.
Yeah, well, we said that, but I think we said that before the campaign. Do we still believe that there are plenty of other things happening in the campaign to talk about? Like, it has not been the most exciting campaign.
If we were playing Journo Bingo, Jessie, that sentence is something that normally gets said around about this time by a journalist.
Yeah,
like,
that's
it's not
true.
that exciting. None of the campaigns are exciting. That's the whole point.
It's the biggest insult you've ever paid me. But
you know that. You don't. When have you ever been at CHQ wandering around, flicking your pen in the air, going, you know what? Let's inject some incitement into this campaign.
No, because when you're at campaign headquarters,
really
the campaign is really interesting and exciting. You have to. There's all sorts of people you're trying to keep in line.
Oh, we're having a lot of fun. There's no doubt about that. But for the rest of those watching from the stands, they're not seeing what's happening below the surface. Anyway,
that's true.
Okay, one thing that did happen this weekend was we had the two parties launch their campaigns. Funnily enough, on the same day. I can't recall when that happened in recent federal elections, but also there was this period there over the last 3 or 4 cycles where the campaign launches were happening later and later and later because of that reason about once you formally launch your campaign, you can't pillage taxpayers' money to fly around the country, and you now have to pay for it yourself, hence why they were launching it so late. Now they seem to have gone midway through, and I'm wondering in the back of my mind, did that rule change or something now so they don't care about that, or maybe they've just decided to go earlier? But also I'm interested about the coordination of why they both landed on the same day. Anyway, we can talk. I'll get your thoughts on that perhaps when we sort of break it down. I want to do the Labor Party launch first. 3 major announcements that came out of it, one around housing, one around taxation, one around healthcare. Labor's commitment to $10 billion to construct 100,000 homes for first home buyers, specifically for first home buyers, and offering a 5% deposit scheme to enhance their affordability. So both the supply and demand thing was probably the big standout one for me. One about introducing a permanent $1,000 instant tax deduction for work-related expenses, and pledging to expand the Medicare for new care clinics, and reaffirm stuff around free TAFE. Initial reactions from both of you. David, I'll go to you first. What were your big takeaways from the Labor Party launch on the weekend?
I thought, well, I'm reminded that back in the day we used to try and find out when the Liberal Party launch was so we could launch ours on the same day with a view to, because we were incumbents at the time we were making these judgments, we thought our launch would be better than theirs and wipe them out of the media cycle or diminish them in the media cycle. The fact that they're on the same day is curious. I think Labor's launch fundamentally was bigger. It had, more pizzazz, more colour, more movement. It was the usual leader with living luminaries of the party, a gathering of the clans, and I thought the Liberal launch, by contrast, was, it was 250 people, so it was very small. It didn't have any pizzazz. It wasn't a campaign launch with any colour or movement. And that surprised me because, again, going back to this thing of the coalition needing big moments to mix things up, change things up, and here they run this small, placid little campaign launch. In terms of the policies, both sides are obviously feeling unconstrained by the budget, and both sides are launching themselves into measures which appeal to home buyers. So housing is obviously a key concern, and that is as we all know, that's a cost of living adjacent issue. So both sides are hunting in the same territory. Both sides are looking for voters in the outer suburbs who are under financial stress, or families trying to move into those outer suburbs and get their first home. Yeah.
Jessie, to you. I thought the housing policy that Labor announced was excellent. And I started to wonder, why didn't we announce this one last year and give our candidates plenty of time to bed this in to the electorate?
So I think there would be some in the federal government that would be very frustrated to hear, Stephen, you didn't know they had a shared equity scheme before.
No, I didn't.
It was at 30%. That would be how much you'd have to own, not 5. It is an excellent policy that I think was originally devised by the Victorian State Labor government. I agree. I think it's a really good policy. I think what is interesting about the federal Labor Party, which I noticed in particular the difference when moving to state politics, is the acceptance of how long an idea takes to penetrate the electorate. And I'm not sure whether that's because Labor federally has been a bit scarred about some of the policy attacks that have come during federal campaigns, and don't want a long time for policy to be ripped apart, or whether it's just a focus on the federal gallery and therefore that bubble, and as long as they get it, the voter gets it. But federal campaigns in particular do seem to wait longer before announcing signature policies. At a state level, and this is true in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria and South Australia, I can't say this that I focused enough on the WA election to say if they've done that. I think they did. The key policies are out a lot earlier to give you the time to have them penetrate the electorate. So, there's always this trickiness when you're coming up with the announcement calendar for a campaign. How do we get our big ideas out early so that we can make sure the electorate knows about them, but also make sure those 33 days where we have all the journalists on the bus, they don't write the dreaded story that we've run out of puff and we have nothing interesting to say or no new policies to announce. So it's this really tricky balance of how do you announce something and keep reinforcing it without the journalists getting boring and saying you've run out of puff. A lot of people say the Victorian 2010 campaign they look like they ran out of puff. There weren't enough ideas. So it is a tricky balance. I would say on housing, the federal Labor government have been talking about housing for a long time. This feels like a bit of a brick on top. I think the timing of it was probably okay. I think the interesting thing is Dutton's announcement so late of his policy, which I suspect is partly because they knew it was going to be torn apart for the inflation machine it is. So they waited as long as possible to try and get cut through on what is fundamentally one of the worst public policy announcements for a campaign in a long time. And I would be very frustrated if I was like the Labor policy chief right now, because I'd be thinking our policy is not inflationary. Our policy involves a demand answer, but Labor's policy has just been wrapped up with the Liberals as really bad for the housing market and inflationary, and I don't think that is actually a fair assessment of the two policies.
And the plundering your own super fund pathway, which has kind of been tampered with before, I'd be very interested to get some research on this, but I think even those who did plunder their own super funds during COVID resented it. And then tried to replenish those accounts. I don't know how popular it is. And I think people do comprehend the idea that they're plundering their future to survive in their present. And it doesn't do anything to alleviate their sense of grievance. I'd like to see some research because I'm not certain of that, but that's my suspicion. So the Liberals going there is not the sort of clear-cut winner that a lot of Tories imagine it to be.
And it looks sneaky, which I just think re-emphasises the view by voters out there that Peter Dutton and the Tories are sneaky. And I just, everything that, like, they look like the kind of group that's going to be cutting corners and aren't honest, bargainers with the electorate. And so I just think that people, and it also plays into this whole, you can't risk them because you just, just your intention, not 100% certain fair income. And I just think that's a view on the electorate right now. And, we'll talk about it a bit later on, but I mean, speaking to I'm getting calls from folks that are actually out there talking to voters, door knocking across seats up and down the East Coast. And that's the feedback getting on the doors from people about Dutton. They're going, I don't trust him. I'm just not 100% certain that he's got our interests at heart. And so things like attacking your pension is, one of those policies that, to your point, David, people would be a little bit concerned about.
It's so interesting, though, because it is a policy, like, I broadly think the movement, and this is not just the Labor government, I think the movement has kind of banked super. And I think that it is something that we're going to have to keep defending. And I would like to see a little bit more of a broad defence of preservation as a concept, because if it goes for housing, it could go for any other policy issue that the government is having, and it is your money, not the government's, not to fix whatever failures they've not fixed with other policy answers. I do think that people trust super, and I think we could do better to just reinforce how important it is to people's retirement. Because I agree with you, David, that if you actually take them through the policy, people would be a bit like, well, why, that seems unfair. But I worry at first blush, just hearing $25,000 is already your money that you can use now. And I worry at first blush it is a populist sounding policy.
I think that's a really good point. Super does need its defenders because its victory seems so patently obvious, and that's when things might run into trouble. I mean, when you compare the performance of superannuation funds to retail trusts, super funds are just miles ahead, and nobody resents that more than the retail trusts. And then you've got characters like Janet Albrechtsen in The Australian, who's running her own personal jihad against super funds.
Absolutely.
Because there's this conspiracy theory inside the coalition that super funds are union and Labor, and they've got gazillions of dollars, and they're using those dollars to change and transform the business community in ways that are inimical to the interests of the Liberal Party. And so there's a sort of a vast conspiracy, which over-imagines how super funds coordinate, let alone care. But, I think that's an interesting battlefield of the future.
Out of the Liberal or coalition campaign launch on the weekend, Jessie, do you think, given that what we talked about last week about how the Liberal campaign was off the rails somewhat, not completely, but at least 4 of the 15 wheels were off the rails and we were starting to wonder where it was going, did this campaign get it back on track? And I say that because that's their campaign.
I see what you've done there.
Yeah, they need it. Maybe they should take some advice from their own friggin' bloody slogan. Why don't you get back on track, big fella? Is it back on track?
So I think that they are taking a really conservative approach to this campaign in some parts and then others not at all. So I agree with David. It was a small campaign launch. What it screamed to me was, you are petrified of protesters. Like, your whole campaign looks like something where you couldn't tell people where it was. You didn't want too many tickets. You wanted to make sure that there was no chance that Gaza protesters or climate change protesters turn up at this thing. It is screaming a bit of a bunker mentality from the Liberal Party. I've spoken to again, I don't know why I've spent so much time in this campaign talking to the Liberals, but I have, who are saying that they're finding it frustrating that Dutton seems to have seized up a bit in this campaign and he's being far more sort of worried or conservative or not leaning into his instincts as much as they would like him to. And that sort of suggests to me that they do need a momentum shift. Whether they're brave enough to do it or whether they can get their party aligned enough to do it is another question, because I have also heard there is tension happening between the leaders' travelling party and the campaign, which we've never heard before. So it'll be fascinating to see how that rolls out. I've never heard of a campaign where that happens.
No. I mean, this is a campaign really where Dutton had nothing to lose and he just should have let it rip. And, let Dutton be Dutton. I mean, this is a campaign where they needed to win a 2-front war, win a lot of seats. This is probably his last shot at the title. He should have just been running around having fun and putting it all on the table and running this sort of boring, orthodox, small target campaign with no imagination. It's just a pathway to more of the same for him, and it'll be the end of his career.
And it's interesting because, as we all know, during campaigns, parties like to play these little games where these mythical tests are set up for a leader, for a state leader, for a campaign official about, if X doesn't happen, Y has to happen after the campaign. One of the funniest examples is when in the election where Anastasia Palaszczuk had all of 6 seats, a Tarago's worth of MPs, and the day of the election, Chris Milner wrote in the paper that if Anthony Chisholm as a state secretary did not win government back, he should lose his job, which is just an insane metrics. The hilarious thing is that Anastasia did win government back.
Completely unreasonable, and he did it. Yes.
But these things happen. This is going to start happening to Dutton. I think Nikki Sava's already put the opening salvo out today, and that is a real indicator of how the party thinks things are going. They will start setting little tests for Dutton because those people who want the leadership afterwards want to set unreasonable tests to take it off him on the other side.
Yeah, and they're brimming with talent, aren't they? I mean,
indeed.
They have so many options, haven't they? They can get Angus Taylor, who's got every quality of a haircut except it. I mean, they're in desperate times.
They are.
Speaking of desperate times, you know that you're in desperate times when your campaign is struggling, so therefore you strategically think back to when the campaign was in the good old days, and so you bring back people from that time period. And, since Liberation Day, the influence of Donald Trump has impacted this campaign in ways that we probably couldn't have predicted. And so therefore the coalition has spent the past after spending the past 3 years running towards MAGA, are now about facing and running away from Donald Trump. And then only to have Jacinta Price not get the memo, rock up at a press or at an event where there's media and yell out, let's make Australia America again, or let's make Australia great again, or whatever the hell it was.
Let's make Australia great again.
Yeah, David, is this a sign of how? What do you take from that? Is it a disconnect? Like, did she not get the memo? Is the campaign disconnected? Is it just desperation? Was Dutton pleased with that? I don't know. What do you make of this?
Well, I think, as you said, and as we've discussed many times, there is a group of people inside the coalition, most particularly the Liberal Party, who are Trump enthusiasts. And there was, I think, a brief window, the Trump golden age might have lasted for about 60 days, where Trump's sort of war against illegal immigration, the woke conquest of American universities, the sort of the Doge assault on government waste, all of these things got Conservatives desperately excited. But then, as we all know, it all turned to custard, didn't it? Because he moved away from those fertile, happy hunting grounds for the Conservatives. Somebody gave Donald Trump a map for Christmas, and he looked at the map and said, "Hey, Greenland looks interesting." And then, I'm going to try this tariffs thing. And so it all turned to custard, and suddenly all of those Conservatives here, and we could be talking about Conservatives in Canada or anywhere really, the Conservatives here, all MAGA adjacent Conservatives outside the United States, have found themselves stranded. This is Dutton, of course, seeking to mitigate this, has tried to, I'll stand up for Australia, and we've been through all of that. But you scratch the surface, and there's that saying, the electorate always works you out, don't they? They can sniff it. And so all of these MAGA adjacent people are now just a critical embarrassment for the coalition. And, of course, the trick to being a MAGA person who's an embarrassment to the coalition is they don't know they are, do they?
Everyone they talk to agrees with them.
Everyone they talk to agrees with them. Being a Green and being a MAGA person is kind of the same. I mean, how do you know if someone's MAGA? Don't worry, they'll come up and tell you. So they've got these sort of outspoken half-wits roaming across their party and their campaign, and it's just going to be hard to lasso up all of them.
Because it worked for them. Like, they thought that they're probably reaching right now for solutions to their problem, and they've gone back and gone, well, geez, we did the no campaign really well, so let's just keep doing that again. So they're trying to use yesterday's strategy for the terrain they're operating in right now, and it backfired tremendously. Jessie, what would you do to turn things around if you were running the campaign for the Tories?
Oh, gee whiz. Look, part of it is a great question, because we all fantasise at some point of actually being allowed to run a Tory campaign, because we know exactly where we'd hit ourselves to really make it hurt. So there's a fun mind game that we've all played, either alone or with friends. So I think the challenge for this week, if I was going to describe the Liberals' campaign, was when they said the quiet part out loud. And I think I would be telling Dutton that if he doesn't start nailing his message more clearly, like if I was the head of the actual the headquarters, Hursty, I would be saying, all right, I'm clearing out his travelling party. I'm sending my people out there, because those people that are with him clearly think Sky After Dark is where the voters are at, and we need some people who actually watch what voters watch to be with him. So I would be doing that, because the problem that they have right now is that while Dutton isn't cutting through, other things are. So Sarah Henderson's comments about free TAFE, which are an absolute unmitigated disaster for the Liberal Party in my view, are going to happen and are going to get more attention if the leader is not filling the space. And that's why we're seeing, in my view, a biggest focus on some of the terrible Liberal candidates that they've had. Like, none of these blows are really being landed on the Labor Party. We haven't seen a sort of and we've all met them, candidates from the Labor Party who a microphone gets put in front of them and they say all of the things that you are trying to get everyone to just stay away from. We haven't seen much of that from the Labor Party because the Liberal Party is not putting pressure on them. So that's what I would do. I would clear out his travelling party and I would put some people in there that are going to focus on the main game.
Interesting. You mentioned Senator Sarah Henderson's remarks at some sort of private event. We've got the audio of it, and I'll play that now.
The free TAFE policy is just not working. I'm trying to be polite. We all love the Gordon. We love the Gordon. It's a very important part of our community. But the free TAFE policy so far has cost this country $1.5 billion.
So listening to that, Jessie, obviously free TAFE is a huge policy here in Victoria. She's a Victorian senator. She's referencing the Gordon TAFE, which is in Geelong. You can't miss it as you drive into town. And she's even talking about how important it is, but we've still got to gut the funding for it so young kids can't get quality education in particular skills training. How bad is this for the campaign, particularly in a seat like Corangamite, where there's so many young people and their families are sending their kids to get free TAFE at Gordon?
I cannot understand why she said this, because free TAFE is it's not only phenomenally popular as a policy, it's also not unpopular in the cohorts that the Liberals care about as well. Like there is a skills gap that we're trying to deal with, and it is something employer groups are talking about a lot. Now, their answer is often temporary migration visas, but the actual more popular answer to it is train our young people to get the skills they want for the job, the skills they need for the job they want. So I am astounded that she has said it. I am also hoping that Dutton takes his son out to the next press conference, because he is an apprenticeship. He is an apprentice. He has trained at either a registered private facility or a TAFE. I would like to ask him the question about how important trade is, and whether that is going to help him get a home. Because I think once you start dragging your 20-year-old around to press conferences and putting your family at the front of your campaign and actually having them answer questions, they should be expected to answer other questions as well.
Good segue to our next segment. Our special guest has been quietly sitting away there in the green room, eating canapes and drinking champagne, because that's what we do. We provide this for our guests that come on the show. She's the Guardian's Victorian State reporter. Benita Kolovos joins us, and we're going to talk a bit about the media and the coverage of the campaign. Benita, if you were to be in one of those press conferences where the opposition leader Peter Dutton fronts up with his son, would you go hard in asking critical questions of a young 18-year-old, 20-year-old family member? Like, they're fair game, right? Or do you kill Bambi? What are you going to do in that situation?
What's the saying about the family of politicians being conscripts? Like, they don't have a choice in the matter.
Yeah.
They're kind of forced along the ride. And usually, most politicians try and keep their families out of it, particularly Peter Dutton. He's been very, very private. Mm-hmm. And one of the criticisms that we hear all the time about him from his own party is that he hasn't, shown voters his softer side. And maybe that was part of the reason why he decided to bring Harry along with him. But then, at the same time, when you do that, you are opening yourself up to questions. I think there was a lot of criticism because Harry was talking about how hard it was to save up to buy a home. And obviously everyone knows that Peter Dutton has like a $30 million property portfolio. Surely you can help your kid out. You're in a position to help your kid out, and he's sitting there telling everyone how much he's struggling. So that kind of dragged on for a couple of days. And
you don't build a property portfolio like that if you're just handing houses over to your children. You've got to be hard-nosed about this stuff, don't you?
It's I think my mum was describing it as skippy behaviour, because no Greek parent would do that to their kid if they could help. But yeah,
that's good.
It's is it a sign of desperation from Dutton? Is it a sign of genius to have a plain speaking tradie with him? And then what do we do as journalists? when he's there. I feel like, you've allowed it. You've opened it up. You're probably going to have to take some tough questions, but at the same time, I can't help but feel for Harry too, because he is not an elected representative, nor does he want to be an elected representative, and here he is facing the tough questions.
Can I get a sense from you, Benita, about, I think Jessie might have touched on the topic before about the connection between journalists and the campaign and being stuck on the bus or charter flights or whatever. Just give us our listeners out there, give us a bit of a snapshot of life as a reporter on the campaign trail.
Yeah, so I think one thing that people might not know is the media have to pay to join the leaders on the planes, on the buses. It's on the hotels. They all have to stay at either the same hotel as the Prime Minister or nearby. It's really, really expensive, really long days, and it's also very carefully stage managed. And I think that's the thing that I find quite difficult watching from afar. There's probably one press conference a day. Sometimes it will be pulled, or there'll just be some photo opportunities with a brief comment from one of the leaders, which is on message. If you've got a list of questions about something else, they're probably not going to answer them or answer them the way you want them to. And I remember in 2022, I was at one of the press conferences where everyone came off the bus and there was this frantic energy to try and get a question in, because that was the only time you're going to speak to the leader that day, even though you're with them at all times. It's quite a strange thing. And then you also don't have that kind of lack of interaction with the public. You're not, you might be in an electorate that's marginal, but you're not there for very long. You're not talking to normal people. So how can you really get a gauge on where things are going? And I think, if we go back to 2019 with the Bill Shorten election, the miracle by Scott Morrison, maybe that's why people didn't really get the mood, because it became quite a horse race, and it, was hard to actually think bigger about the mood in these electorates when you're too busy chasing around the two leaders.
I think, Benita, you make some excellent reflections on how the campaign bus can distort the news. When you say that, I think of as a campaign organiser, brilliant. Like you kind of got them captured. They're having to cover the things, and I will not lie, at some points you're trying to work out what time do we do the press conference and move them to somewhere else, so there is no opportunity for a vox pop, because a vox pop is always the worst type of television for a campaign announcement, because mostly they're going to go against you. So it is worth reflecting on that. I find some of the reporting from some journalists to be entirely bereft of real community views, but it's a reasonable point. We spend the whole campaign trying to make sure that they can't have any other view apart from the one that we feed them.
And I think that's where media organisations are trying to be a bit smarter. We're not on the bus at The Guardian all the time. We'll pick when we jump on it and jump off it. We spend a lot of our resources getting people into interesting marginal electorates, talking to people. We've currently got like a series where they're like long-form interviews with regular human beings, which is, it sounds really odd to say it like that, but it doesn't happen a lot during an election. Even The Age have now got journalists on the beat in seats covering those seats for the entire duration of the campaign. So I think people are kind of catching on, and it's the only way you're really going to get a mood for things. Like I remember having a back and forth during 2022 around Higgins, that seat, because I'd spent a couple of days there talking to people, and there were like baseball bats out against Scott Morrison. People were furious, even in, your well-heeled suburbs of Armidale and like. And I turned around and said, look, I don't know who's going to get up, but I don't think the Liberals are, because, of those conversations I'd had. Same with some of those teal seats too. So I think, people are catching on and spending a bit more time and resources out in the community. But, on that point too, you mentioned the vox pops, and I think that's a really good point to make. that, trying to actually find an undecided voter can sometimes be really hard, and you're more likely to get that rusted on, voter that's happy to talk to the media about their political views, because most really don't want to. Like, it's usually quite hard to go up to a complete stranger and get them to tell you who they're voting for. So you probably do end up with a bit of a skewed response.
I've often questioned about that. I mean, how truly undecided or persuadable is someone who is self-reporting and rocking up to a journalist of all people to say, let me tell you what I really think, as opposed to the intrusiveness of a door knock where they are targeted, interactions on people's doorsteps and getting a much stronger flavour. But, better than not doing it at all, I guess, is probably the takeaway I'd take away from that. David?
For sure.
Benita, I wonder if in those travelling parties, have we seen any change in the sort of outlets and people that are going into them? We saw some influencers and others go into the budget lockup, and Trump has made something of the fact that he's brought all of these strange new characters and alien life forms into the press gallery there at the White House. Are you seeing anything like that with travelling parties?
Not on the buses, no. And given the way that a lot of journalists responded when the influencers came to the budget, it doesn't surprise me that they wouldn't try to do that. It is really your kind of mainstream media outlets, the ones that have got the money to do it, and, some have multiple people on the buses. I can't imagine the travel bill for that. And I think it is worth noting that it does lock out a lot of those smaller media organisations as well, that it would be helpful to have there that might provide a different perspective. But, yeah, you don't really see that because it is so expensive. And even in the budget, they did have to pay for some of those influencers' flights and accommodation to come to Canberra which would probably be like the most expensive week to be in Canberra too. So I think cost is a big barrier.
It's a funny one though, isn't it? Because, there's a debate, obviously, well, tell me if I'm wrong here, Benita, but there's a debate within the media world about having better engagement with the electorate. And then we have a new media trying to achieve that. Yet journalists are now shitty that this is happening. Like, how do you, I don't know, how do we put this round peg in a square hole kind of situation? How do we fix this?
It's a big debate, right? And, I find even within newsrooms, people have different views on this. For me, as I'm not a very young woman anymore, but I'm still young. And I think that if I think about my friends, none of them are going to pick up a newspaper or even the concept of paying a news subscription. They're just not doing that. And even if they were, like, I gave them my password, off you go, they don't have that perceived background or knowledge that a newspaper expects a reader to have when they pick up a political article. So I do think it is important to meet young female voters where they are and to, go on the podcasts that they listen to. I know obviously media don't like it because usually the questions aren't very tough, not as much fact checking going on. But at the same time, we're not the audience. And I think when they're going through, I listened to Abby Chatfield's podcast, for example, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and it was a lot around how to vote, how the parliament works. We all know that, but the audience might not. So I do think it's a bit unfair to put so much criticism on that approach. Although, at the same time, I understand the concerns around the fact-checking and those aspects and making sure that they don't just have the opportunity just to spout lines as well. But, yeah, I think it's a bit more complicated than people are treating it at the moment.
That's like everybody. I've pondered this mystery, and I wondered if, obviously influencers and podcasters and so forth aren't and don't feel bound by journalistic ethics. They don't, it's like they haven't taken the Hippocratic Oath of journalism. They don't have to, and they can engage in flagrant commentary. But I wonder, the more the media itself does that and becomes commentators rather than neutral observers and analysts that, in some utopian universe they were once, there's a blurring, isn't there? Where I mean, what's the difference between a deeply opinionated political commentator and activist writing for The Australian and a deeply political character running a podcast? I mean, it's become blurred, and so the sort of unalloyed virtue that you would look for in journalism is looking a little tattered in places, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think one thing that journalists hate to admit is that we all have backgrounds and we all have values, and we bring those values into our work. And it's just inevitable, right? Like your experiences shape who you are as a person.
Not everyone can be as neutral as we are. That's true.
And sometimes I think that it's a shame that we don't lean into that. Like when I talk to a lot of young, diverse journalists struggling to break into the industry, we need more voices like that in the media. Even just from a purely self-interested, they have contacts that we might not. In certain seats that we've been looking at, people talk about Bruce, massive multicultural community there. Hawke, same thing here in Victoria. That would benefit from having people with different experiences and backgrounds and values contributing. So if the mainstream media aren't doing it, well, they're going to go somewhere else. So you can't blame them.
No. I'm interested, Benita, to get your thoughts from through the lens of a Victorian-based state reporter. One of the possibly unanswerable questions we had at the start of this series was what role would the Premier of Victoria, Jacinta Allen, play in this election? And there was, before the campaign, I think there was a bit of chatter, certainly amongst the political class, about Albanese not wanting to be seen standing next to Jacinta Allen, but that was put to bed quite quickly. I think in the very first week, her and the Prime Minister stood up. Just getting your sense of how things are being interpreted or viewed about the relationship between these two particular Labor politicians.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Within the first couple of days of the election, we had the Albo bus, in Melbourne, and a lot of people on the bus with a lot of background about how deeply unpopular the Victorian government is in Victoria, how federal Labor are concerned that Jacinta Allen's going to be a drag on the Prime Minister. And it was all coming from, federal insiders briefing out to the people on the bus. I think it's worth noting that this happened in 2022 as well, when we were coming out of COVID, and they were really concerned that Daniel Andrews was on the nose and he was toxic and he was associated with these lockdowns. He didn't appear with Albanese until day 30, so much later than Jacinta Allen. And that was the only time he was there. And I remember being at that press conference, and he brought up COVID, and Albanese was standing behind him like, no, you don't talk about COVID when we've just come out of it. And that was the last time we saw him. But I think it just shows like the disconnect again between people in Canberra versus people on the ground. And when I was out there talking to people about the COVID response during that election, it was all about, the vaccine rollouts taking a long time, Morrison not taking it seriously enough, and this idea, right, that the Victorian government was doing what it could with the information it had at the time. There wasn't that sort of anger there. And I guess with the current state of things in Victoria too, it's been a decade now of a Labor government here, how much that all impacted, I guess that's a question I have for you guys. Do you think that people differentiate between state and federal, or does it, I guess, depend on the seat that you're in?
I think that the one thing the Labor Party is very hesitant to accept is the Labor brand is a Labor brand. And it is the reason that we are able to form majority government, but it is also the reason that we can't necessarily say, that person's a Labor person, but I won't stand next to them and suddenly now no one will realise we're from the same team. It is an insane approach in my view, and something that really just, if you are trying to do this ridiculous game where it's should we stand next to them, should we not, it only draws attention to something that you don't want to talk about in the first place. So it seems very dumb to me. I think that there is all sorts of people that will look at different evidence from different state elections, different federal elections. Like I've been told by a previous premier that in Queensland it's better for the state Labor government if we have a federal Liberal government, but in Victoria it is better for a Victorian Labor government to have a federal Labor government. I think that people say these things without actually looking at all of the data, and there's a lot of mythology around these things. I think that the most popular premier in the country right now is Pete Malinauskas. And if this whole idea that the popularity of the premier is the thing that determines seats, we should be taking Sturt and we should not have a problem in Boothby. I don't think that's a reasonable thing to put onto the state South Australian branch of the Labor Party, who are doing a phenomenal job and have punched well above their weight in terms of returning seats. And if you look at these things, like the Prime Minister's approval ratings are basically the same across the country, and the Federal Labor's primary vote is the same in New South Wales as it is in Victoria. And I think that it's such a minor impact of the vote. You need a very extreme example of perhaps a corrupt politician or something like that for it to actually manifest in a proper vote shift way, would be the way I would describe it. David, you might have a slightly different view.
Yeah, it's only slightly different. I mean, I think your point is absolutely right that, we're all in this together and it's a nonsensical position to say, listen, if we just hide Fred up the back, no one will remember that Fred's in Labor. I mean, that's just absurd. And to be fair, I don't remember over the course of my career people advocating, that we had needed to hide somebody. We're all in it together. I think, however, where I might differ with you a bit is obviously where premiers and state governments are doing well. They do build the brand and add to the lustre of the party, and the reverse is true too. So we see, in some corners of the land we're at a better state of health, and in other corners of the land we're at a poorer state of health. So it does make a difference. And Benita, you asked, do voters differentiate? Well, of course they do, but mostly. There's always some who don't. But even so, the brand has momentum in places, and that momentum does infect other tiers of government. So I guess what I'm saying is I think it's reasonable to say that Jacinta Allen and the Victorian government at this moment in time are not adding lustre to the Labor brand in this contest. But then the idea that as a consequence, if you're not seen with her, you'll mitigate that is ridiculous. You'll just create a story around the fact that you're not being prepared to hang together. And there were moments in time where federal leaders weren't adding lustre to the brand, and premiers had the self-discipline to be seen with them. So you can't divorce yourself from the party and imagine that everybody in the electorate's going to suddenly forget what team they're in. Yeah, you are all in it together. I'd finish with this small tactical point, which is that I think all that Jessie and I have said on this issue is common sense, really, and I'm confident that when that travelling party, when Albo's travelling party came to Melbourne, they would have said, now we're going to be seen with the Victorian Premier so that we don't have this long lingering story about us not being seen with the Victorian Premier. And we're going to do it at this point in the campaign so that by the time we get to day 20 and 30 and 33 of the campaign, it will have been of no consequence. I'll finish with that, I suppose.
I think it's also worth adding too on this point that the Victorian opposition leader, Brad Batten, hasn't done a lot with Peter Dutton either. So maybe that's the reverse where Dutton, the consensus I seem to have amongst everyone, state Labor, federal Labor, state Libs, is that Dutton is not popular in Victoria. And I think that's been a conscious decision by Brad Batten as well. He's done one pick-up, didn't even have any questions at it, where they were at the petrol station together. And he's, I had an interview with him this week where he was even distancing himself from Dutton's previous comments around Melburnians being scared to go out for dinner because of African gangs. And I know that was so long ago, but people still talk about it here. And he also distanced himself from the nuclear plan. He also, when he became leader, he spoke about how they were so similar. They were former police officers. They have same values. They think the same pathway to victory is through the suburbs. But then in the interview that we put up this week, he was saying, actually, we're really different and we have different backgrounds, and I've had some harder challenges in my life than Peter had, which I thought was also very telling on the other side of the political aisle.
So I guess the takeaway there is that Brad Batten is just as courageous as members of the Victorian Federal Labor Corporate. Probably different to Brad's take, saying it to your face on the record. Good on you. Benita, we're out of time. I wanted to ask you some questions about the debate. Debates, of which there are now more that have been announced, but maybe we'll have to try and get you back on the show before we close out for this election series. But thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us today.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Let's move to the categories for this week. I'm looking forward to hearing. We've had a number that have been sent into us by our wonderful listeners out there, but obviously I want to also hear from the two of you, starting with our traditional one that we have every year, Tory with a typewriter nomination. Jessie, do you have a Tory with a typewriter? If not, I can read out one from one of our listeners.
Well, like, how many times can we give it to Phil Corey? Like, that's my actual question. I am broadly, and I've mentioned this earlier, I am broadly frustrated with the press gallery lumping both of these housing announcements together, noting that neither of them do anything for supply, while completely ignoring Labor's work on supply, their national targets on supply, the fact that they're working with state governments on supply and have actually improved supply and have a further announcement about that. So I think the AFR in particular has found it challenging because the announcement from Dutton around tax-free mortgage repayments is batshit. Like, it's a policy that basically negates all of the work the RBA has been trying to do in terms of putting us through rate pressure to decrease inflation. And the AFR have really struggled how to fit this thematic. They've really struggled with how to make it sound like Labor's housing policy is as inflationary as Dutton's. Like, the AFR couldn't find an economist that wasn't saying Dutton's policy is worse. So I've found that they are clearly different policies, and it has been reported, I think, very poorly.
David.
Well, I was really going to. I can't ascribe it to an individual journalist because it's not tagged, but Sky News, that publication of record, has taken a sort of an interesting turn in recent days, really, where it's starting to get hysterical about the Teals, and. Monique Ryan is always their favourite target, and I enjoyed the fact that they're now coming out against undisclosed paid influencer political endorsements. And so there's now a terrific little cottage industry at Sky, which is finding paid influencers who've supported Teals. So Monique Ryan takes firm stand against undisclosed paid political content amid cash for content saga involving Allegra Spender. A snappy little headline there you'll have noticed of 45 words. I'm enjoying the Sky at Night show, which normally howls at the moon, turning its attention onto the Teals.
That's funny. One Tory with the typewriter nomination is from Lucky McCarthy. He says the ABC TV Hobart and the Mercury newspaper are the two that is obviously a Tassie comrade. He nominates both ABC TV Hobart and the Mercury. He said we had over 100 people for a Murray Watt rally in Hobart yesterday. 3 TV cameras and a snapper from the Mercury came along, and only Channel 7 ran 3 seconds of the rally. The paper didn't run any of it, and not even a bloody mention on the ABC or the Merc, says Lucky McCarthy. So he's obviously is at his wit's end with local media down in the Apple. I also thank you, Mr. McCarthy, for your nomination. Probably unanswerable questions this week. Who's got some probably unanswerable questions? I've got one from myself and one from Jake, but Jessie, do you have one there?
No, I don't.
David, do you have one there?
Well, it's unanswerable adjacent. It's Sarah Elks in The Australian wrote a terrific little yarn. Adam Bant not so vocal when he's asked the questions. An unanswerable question here is the Greens refusing to answer any questions. So, interestingly enough, Adam Bant was in Brisbane only for the second time during this campaign. They have 3 seats there. You would have thought it might be the epicentre of their effort. And he appeared with Griffith MP, Sir Buffton Tufton, and refused to take any more than 2 or 3 questions from the journalists assembled before he ran off into the night, having, of course, roundly condemned everybody else for having such tightly controlled media. They've, in fact, proven to be the most tightly controlled of them all.
Well, he's an independent, David, so does he really have time to support these?
I
these
just don't see green anymore. I
I
see teal. It's like they're merging into the one shade, aren't they?
We probably unanswerable question. What's going through Peter Dutton's head as Jacinta Price says, "Let's make Australia great again"? Jessie, what? I mean, there's conflicting reports about how Dutton felt about this, and what do you think?
Look, it's really. I think it's one of the fundamental challenges for a politician when addressing a room of people. She has walked into this rock star reception of people. They think she's amazing. And this is the kind of message that they would be very open to hearing. They're all MAGA types that they are speaking to. So Dutton has to make the decision on the spot. Am I speaking to the people at home or the people in this room? And I think he picked the people in the room. And I don't know exactly how you manage your way out of that in the press conference. He did let her keep speaking and took more questions and said, are there any other questions for Jacinta? I think that he should have been more – he picked wrong. He should have picked the people at home.
So in the words of the great knight from Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, he chose poorly.
He did choose poorly.
Another one from Jake for probably unanswerable question. Is the Labor Party worried about the recent opinion polls in terms of our primary vote? And what ways does Labor increase its primary vote at this election? I mean, that is truly a probably unanswerable question in this moment. I don't know if any of you two want to venture a thought on that.
We're always worried about the primary vote. Always. It is the thing that we're most worried about all campaign.
I've been worried about the primary vote since 1990 when we fell to 39% for the first time.
Boy, did we have a way to go since then?
It's got worse since then. I worry about it constantly. I mean, the good news is at the minute we're back at 33, which sounds like a miserable number in historical terms, but in the moment that's not so bad.
And was enough to get us to 70, 78 last time.
Well, the Liberals are on 36. They should be very worried about that.
LNP's on 35 right now, 33 for us. Look, if you do go back and look at, even if you go on Wikipedia and look at any of the sort of state or federal elections and pick a battleground seat that is notoriously always up for grabs and just scroll back through, because you can just click on that, look at the previous election, look at the previous election, look at the previous election, go back to even to 93 or 96, there was in a House of Reps seat, in a marginal seat in the 90s, there was 5 candidates on the ballot. There was, Labor, Liberal, maybe Greens, and some sort of rogue independent, and that was it. You look at those ballot papers now, it's like a Melbourne Cup field. There are so many candidates that run, so there is so much more options for people. And so I think just naturally by the fact that there are more independents running in these races, whether they're popular or not, and they're only getting 1-2%, it is taking away a lot of the primary. There's sort of criticism of the parties or whatever, but just the nature of the way that people engage with candidates in elections these days has changed a lot in the last 20 years, and so therefore it is going to have an impact on it. So it's not just a reflection on I'm not happy with the way the Labor Party are running. There's far more to choose from in the smorgasbord of a ballot booth these days.
The smorgasbord of a ballot booth.
Well, I mean, once upon a time, people would only stick with one brand or one type of product. I mean, people are shifting in their loyalties, not just in their political behaviour, but in their consumer behaviour as well. It's just the nature of the times we're in.
Most Reluctant Door Knocker Award this week. Does anyone? I've got one cheeky nomination that's come in. Jessie, do you have?
Yes, I've had a few sent to me, happily mostly directed at the Liberal Party, because I've been sent some fascinating pictures of James Stephens, who's running in Sturt, who has someone introducing him to the concept of a door at some point during the door knock. He looks very uncomfortable with the whole thing.
Right.
But the same person did point out it is challenging enough for me as a campaigner to get the candidate to go door knocking. So mocking these people that are out there actually doing it is a bit unfair. At least they're out there actually door knocking, and there are a bunch of candidates who aren't.
Yes.
And also raised the example of Michael Sukkar, who is clearly refusing to do door knocking, and his only photo on all of his social media where he's doing anything like DVC is handing out shopping bags, but he's not even doing that. Someone else is doing that, and he's standing in the general vicinity. So a bit of a defence to those people who find it uncomfortable to go out and do it. It is better to do it.
To be fair to Michael Sukkar, sometimes getting out and introducing yourself to everyone is a surefire way to lose the seat.
It is baffling. It's a probably unanswerable question. How does he keep on winning? Most Reluctant Door Knocker Award, another nomination from Mel Cosgrove, has nominated Walter Koch. And there is a little bit of internal Victorian Field alumni civil war going on there that I am not going to touch with a barge pole. I will step out of that fray. I will say, Mel, though, that Walter did knock doors on the weekend in Chisholm. So there we go. Hot take of the week. Does anyone have a hot take of the week? Wow, no hot takes this week. Okay, Mel Meninga, In Over My Head Award. A couple of nominations here. Anyone got any?
Look, maybe this is also my hot take. So okay. I would say we can actually, I think, admit at this point Dutton is in over his head. My hot take is, and I am guilty of this as well, when you're running through a campaign, you do not want to acknowledge the opposition are having a bad run. Like internally, you're telling everyone that they could get better any minute. Like never take your foot off their necks. Like there is no acceptance. And I remember someone sidled up to me in 2022 and said, Matthew Guy is having a terrible campaign and no one is going to write about it. But the day after, he's going to be absolutely flayed by everyone in his party. Not even the day after, on the news, on the coverage, as soon as it's clear they're losing, everyone is going to rip into him. And I'm going to say, I'm brave enough to say, Dutton is having a terrible campaign. Journalists are not writing enough about what a terrible campaign he's having. I think that Albo was touched up a lot in the last campaign about him not having a good time, and his best part of the campaign was when he had COVID, blah, blah. We had this reportage during the campaign. We are not seeing that about Dutton, who is, in my view, in over his head and is really going to need to turn it around if he wants another chance at all of running for leader again or forming a minority government this time.
It sounds like a good award to have is like Courage Under Fire award, and we could nominate certain journalists right now who are not saying anything but know full well that the Dutton's having a shit campaign. Anyway.
Well, it's also that golden rule, isn't it, that when things go wrong, everything goes wrong. And you kind of feel like, you know, you feel like that's what's happening to the Liberals. Like it's a multi-level failure that's going on. Policy, advertising, travelling party, messaging, look, everything.
Yeah, and we haven't even really looked at campaign content, which we'll do next week when Reid Fleming comes on. Other nominations for In Over My Head, heaps of people nominated Jacinta Price for her performance over the weekend. Probably less so In Over My Head, but way too the opposite of In Over My Head. I think she felt very comfortable in that moment and thought she was doing the right thing by the campaign. Turns out it wasn't. Also, Zach Moran nominated Peter Dutton for not thinking journos would not ask the questions regarding helping his son get into the property market given his extensive property portfolio. Or should it be the Tone Deaf Award? Thank you, Zach, for that one. Marginal seat Hunger Games. Do we have any updates from Maribyrnong, Jessie?
No, I feel like I've now been inundated with text messages defending the candidate for Maribyrnong. And just to be very clear, this is not a crack. I have a lot of respect for someone that can drive excitement and enthusiasm in their campaign, which she clearly has done. It has been pointed out to me that when landing in that seat, I'm now in a very tricky position. When landing in that seat, perhaps everything was not as it should have been as a campaign. And it was necessary to send in reinforcements to ensure that campaign had the best chance, the one that it needed.
Are you suggesting that Bill Shorten?
No, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just
very good scaffolding for the.
I'm just reporting what I've been told.
Poor foundations. Okay, rightio. Well, anyway, do we have any other marginal seat Hunger Games? I don't think we do, right?
I think we've just got to try and extricate Jessie out of this as quickly and as effectively as we can.
Yeah, I don't want a piece of this anymore. I have asked some people in the other states, and it was put to me by a Queenslander, we're all under fire up here. Like, every seat is part of the Hunger Games. There is no seat where people are going, we don't need them, which I thought was a reasonable point.
Next award, the In This Economy Award. Jason P. said with the lack of skills tradies, Senator Henderson calling for the axing of free TAFE, thinking the clip wouldn't service. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about that. Thanks, Jason. Any other In This Economy awards?
Yes, announcing that you will make tax-free payments for the mortgage is in this economy. Like, we've literally spent the last 3 years talking about fighting inflation. It's like I'm agog.
Well, and remember, T's and C's apply. And it's a first-time home buyer. It's only for 5 years. It's only with new builds. You know, that all of those are significant things, but
sure.
It's still T's and C's apply.
Sure, they've caveated away even the political capacity for them to win votes out of this. So it makes no sense at all.
I actually thought it was a really weak piss-out announcement. When you sort of look at the math on it, if I was a voter in Voterland in a marginal seat with mortgage pressure, I'd be like, that's it? That's all you've got?
55 grand. I'd be a bit like, I've got a mortgage and now I don't get this free $55,000 from the government.
Yeah, it's going to get swallowed up. All right, the Teal Temptation Trophy.
It has been put to me that the candidate in the seat of Griffiths, what's her name? Coffee.
Renee Coffee.
She's tending a little pink in her campaign material.
You mean
no, her material is not pink. It's pink.
Right. They're not wearing
it's
red,
not red,
David. They're not wearing red. There's a Teal Temptation, but going the other way. They're putting a bit of pink in their swag. Okay, let's wrap it up. Who won the week? David, you get to serve first this week.
It was still a Labor victory this week. It just wasn't quite as overwhelming as the week before. But as I say, having struggled to listen through the Treasurer's debate and the Energy Minister's debate, they did kind of get parts of their campaign back onto planet Earth. But as we've discussed over the course of this episode, they're still not going where they need to go. So I'd say Labor continuing to run to its plan, message discipline, all of the various components of the campaign are integrated and working well together. Labor's still winning.
Jessie?
I think that's right. I think the momentum is in Labor's direction and they are doing everything they can to maintain it. I don't think we'll see a big momentum shifting type risk from the Labor Party. All the risk will have to come from the Liberals as they sort of try and stop Labor's momentum.
Precisely.
Very good. Very good. Next week, Socially Democratic is hosting an online phone bank. And we're calling on the Socially Democratic community to come together in a moment of solidarity to use our collective voices for change. So instead of sitting around and talking about this election campaign, we're asking you to step into this critically important battle and make some calls to persuadable or undecided voters in key battleground seats. So the details are next Wednesday, the 23rd of April, join us on Zoom at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time for our first ever Socially Democratic Solidarity Phone Bank for Labor. It's your first chance to get to see one another, which will be fun. You'll be trained in how to make great values-based win-the-vote calls. We're going to make some calls. Then we're going to come back and have a bit of a debrief about how we went and maybe have a chat over a beer or whatever your particular tipple is. So it'll be 2 hours of people power. So how to get involved, register by clicking on the link in today's show notes, sign up, bring a friend, it'll be a lot of fun. And we're going to make some calls and win some votes for Labor and do it together. Remember that next week we'll be back with both Jessie and David to wrap up week 4 of the campaign, including the whole bunch of leaders debates. And we're also going to be joined by our special guest, Reid Fleming from Good to Go Digital Campaign Consultancy, who used to work for the Premier here in Victoria to unpack the digital campaign and a lot of the content that we're seeing in the online space. To both Jessie and to David, have a restful and holy Easter if you celebrate. If not, have a great long weekend. Thank you for coming on the show this week, and we'll talk to you both next week.
A great pleasure. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Socially Democratic. Like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser, and get all the latest updates on Socially Democratic by following us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. See you next Friday.